Hi, let's check in with the first 31% of A Distant Mirror by Barbara W. Tuchman. May have done a check-in already on this. I think I did. Uh, you'll know because it will be in a folder with a bunch of other check-ins. So yeah, I just finished chapter 8, where we have the King of France, Jean Le Bon, under what's very flimsy pretexts, putting himself back into captivity with the English. There'd been the disastrous Battle of Poitiers, where the French, who actually had numerical superiority, but were kind of governed by the kind of the bloodlust of like, oh, we're not going to let any of those dirty commoners get to have all the fun of bloodshed and murder. They insisted on not using their longbows and stuff like that, where the English were very happy to use the longbows, which ended up with them getting defeated. And what's worse, what seems to be kind of like almost one of these flukes, the King of France actually falling into English hands and being imprisoned in France, and the French going through a whole shitload of stuff to get the king back. And the English king at this time, Edward III, like just continually upping his demands of what he wanted: a ransom of all the territories of France he wanted. It just crazy. But they do finally get him back. At which point things seem to go so shittily. He actually tries to reignite the crusade because he doesn't have enough stuff going on, and he also wants to perhaps marry someone, the Queen of Provence, or someone who is like in the direct line of the Queen of the Provence, that part of France, to kind of get that, and Naples. But the Pope that was amenable to that dies, and the new one that comes in thinks this is completely a threat to papal supremacy, so that's not going to happen. The crusade doesn't happen, and then he suddenly decides, when there's some kerfuffle about all the ransom payments that have to still yet be paid, and lords that are being held hostage end up leaving without getting properly replaced, or there's quibble over who's going to replace him, because Edward, as always, is playing hardball. He says, "Oh, well, it's time for me to go back to prison." It's like, and his counselors and the Dauphin are like, basically his son, are like, "You don't need to do that. Why are you doing that?" It's like, no, I need to do this. So he goes back, and within about a year, he is dead. He dies of whatever, at 45, which, with all the shit that goes on with health-wise, plague and just all the other illnesses, I can see why that happens. But then he dies, and it's sort of like, Tuchman's like, yeah, well, he has the passivity now of the grave. It's like you get this. Her surmise is like, basically, he just like, this all sucks. I can just be a prisoner, and that'll be more comfortable for me, which, yeah, is a way of doing things. I mean, there's super strong personalities in these histories, and then there are people who aren't. Edward is definitely a very strong personality. Probably a rapist. Is a rapist. That's just a side note. But I mean, one that Tuchman actually does bring up, and yeah, I'll leave that aside. I think I mentioned that earlier. The Dauphin, who has a very kind of sickly aspect, and physically isn't great. It's proved to be actually a really good steward of France. Unfortunately, he's probably got horrible health problems, which are going to probably do him in, and stuff like that. But it's interesting looking at France at this time, because this has very much been, France is the superpower, but you can see how it's been decimated by the kind of the double punch of this what's going to be the 100-year war. They signed a treaty that ended it after 20, but we know there's, I guess, another another 80 to go, whether that's, you know, hyperbole or not, but it's like it's going to go on for a good couple more generations, I know. But there's the superpower England, who is attacks them and makes these claims on the French throne. Shows surprising power. It's got the military advancement of the longbow, which fucks up all the kind of the knights on their armor. There's a whole thing of like, you know, shoot the horses' unprotected rumps, and it just brings the horses down, and there's just a tangle of screaming men and horses, and it's like sounds incredibly gross, but you know, basically it's like all this bullshit of chivalry is bullshit, which, I mean, Tuckman is definitely gone into. What is chivalry? Chivalry is literally, it's horsemen, knights. It's got not as much to do with really with being courtly to and gentle and kind and defender of the faith and all that to knights. That's what it was. Purpose was, is you have all these super violent, heavily armed, super rich guys, because you have to be super rich to be a knight, and they're trying to kind of come up with like, look, we need to kind of come up with something to try and fucking make you guys behave. And the chivalry was one idea of this, and unfortunately it was also an ideology that gave them very fixed ideas of who should be doing the battling, when it should be common archers who are actually your main tool, which the French are so wedded to all this chivalric ideas that they fuck themselves militarily, even though they have far more force, probably far more people, far more riches, you know, and all that. But the English are able to do it. The English are real fucking assholes who are just, you know, raping and pillaging, and you can see that this is just like there's this phenomenon of free companies, that even when the war is over, there's just all these roving bands of soldiers, gangs that have come and come into towns, and either they extort all the money, or they torture people for their money, or they burn everything down. It's just like it's just like the I read these fantasy books called The Black Company. It's like, oh, okay, this is a part of the thing of what the Black Company is that Glenn Cook, the fantasy writer, is obviously kind of hearkening towards, is all these free companies, these unrestrained mercs who go around and when they're not getting paid by a rich guy, they just go and enrich themselves by terrorizing, and gangs that terrorize and make common people's lives miserable. I mean, that's the whole theme of all of this, is this, yes, it's knights in armor, but what knights in armor are usually doing, they're terrorizing and killing and making the lives of peasants, us, miserable, which it makes you think, it's like, oh fuck, things do not change, because, you know, we go on throughout our lives trying to kind of make our lives, but every once in a while, if you've got the misfortune, somebody rich, whether it's a corporation or rich people, can come barreling through your lives and upend everything, put you out of your job. You know, maybe not as to balls to the wall, but almost. I mean, we do have the shadows of rule of law. God, this sounds very like we're in a Mad Max world already. We're not. I mean, that's the thing about this, is just like the idea of state and of any kind of infrastructure or anything like that is not something. And I mean, the 100 Years' War really, this time period, with the plague, but with also states are not, they've kind of gone away from, you're a serf tied to the land and your lord has certain obligations to you. They're starting to drift away from that, but they're in that middle period where there's no state that's come in to kind of like, oh, you feel like you're French, and yes, we provide services, we provide some sort of order. It's like none of that is possible. This is a land decimated. The France is a land decimated by war, by the plague, by all sorts of other things, and really makes a fucked up thing. Tuckman is really great at giving you at zooming in on and giving you telling examples of what is kind of wide-ranging stuff, and saying like, well, we can't say for sure anything about any of these people in a way because it's that chasm of time, but there are little examples that they find that she can find that are like really telling. There is the Jacquerie, a peasant uprising, because they're getting fucked by everybody, and there's a peasant uprising, and if there's one thing the nobles can unite against, it is against a peasant uprising. And they have a thing of the leader of the peasant uprising finally being captured, and the noble mockingly crowning him with a burning hot ring of iron before beheading him. And it's just like, oh, those details of like, how much how much peasants were despised and just looked down upon and given zero respect, and basically, just give us all your fucking money and shut the fuck up, and you stink, and we can do anything with you. Because the wonderful thing about the chivalric code of being a noble knight is that all has to do with your interactions with other knights and women who are of proper status. Anyone lower than that, you can just fuck over in any way you want. You're subhuman. You're nothing to these people. And you just realize how shitty these people, and that all the kind of the tales of chivalry and stuff like that were the works of people who are paid by the knights, the nobles, to write this self-aggrandizing propaganda. I mean, some of it's really great self-aggrandizing propaganda, but I mean, I'm reading at the moment Orlando Furioso, and this is a poet writing to somebody who is a lord who is potentially descended from Orlando and the great knights in the thing. So he's not going to say shitty stuff about them. He might imply shitty stuff about them, and the humor and all that is something like, oh, okay, this is where we get a lot of the heavy irony and winks, and just like, it's like, you guys are pretty ridiculous, you get all of that in there. So yeah. And I mean, it's also really sad in here there's at one point when Jean gets captured and things are really down for the nobles, that the third estate, the bourgeoisie, kind of come in and go, look, we're funding all of this. We want to extract stuff that we put limits on you, that taxation doesn't get approved without our go-ahead, that all these corrupt advisors you have, we're going to put aside, and we're going to have kind of more of like a civil service or stuff like this. But in their desperation for doing some of this stuff, they side with some of the more extreme kind of the Jacquerie and stuff like that, and the nobles turn against them, and things, and basically it goes poorly, and they get butchered as well. And what was like, it was almost like there was a French Revolution, a peaceful French Revolution for the French, 400, 300 years earlier than the French Revolution, which would have been amazing. I can't imagine the world, but there is rightly so, Tuckman says it's like, that was, unfortunately, it was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. Structurally, how things were at that point, it was not going to happen. But it was like, you could feel like, wow, what kind of world would we live in now if that had come so much earlier? I mean, maybe the horrible, shitty stuff would have come earlier, but, we wouldn't have had all the ways to be able to kill each other. I don't know. But yeah, it is a really engaging book. I've been really enjoying it, and I will continue on. I'm reading it along, theoretically, it's a part of Steve Donahue's book club, but he's reading the entire book in like 1 month. And I've basically probably spent half of last month and then into this month reading it, and I'm at 30%. So I doubt very much I'm going to keep up his pace, but I'll bookmark his videos and then get back to them as I catch up, because I'm really enjoying. Really enjoying reading it, and I'd like to form my own ideas before I then go to Steve's and hear probably a much more considered and a much more fulsome view of the time and of history writing. But yeah, Barbara Tuchman is really good at this kind of stuff. I mean, it's a history of the 14th century, which you think could be so dry, could be such a kind of like a textbook, just a boring textbook, whereas this reads really like an interesting kind of grand sweeping novel. It's all supposed to, it's interesting, it's all being kind of lightly hung upon the life of Gerard de Coucy, one of the great northern lords of France, Picard, kind of the Picardy region, I think it is. Ooh, have to look at that. And he finally does come into history here as recorded in history, because he is one of the great nobles who comes along and butchers all the Jacquardis after they have been broken. He's hunting them down in the countryside and, you know, killing them all, hanging them, gutting them, all those filthy peasants. So it's like it's interesting that the central figure that she's chosen is someone who, he just, you know, is one of these fucking noble bastards whose job it was to crush the little person. But the thing is, it's the sad fact of like, you know, who do you have a historical record of? And apparently he is going to become friends with one of the great chroniclers of the era, a guy named is it Jean Froissart? Something like that, who is one of the great sources for the 14th century. So I guess thus gets written about. It's interesting because they're all traveling as a part of kind of a hostage thing to England as the exchange for Jean Le Bon the first time when they're trying to spring him. And maybe Tuchman it's maybe going a little bit into the kind of pulling things, but she puts de Coucy, Froissart, and a 20-year-old Geoffrey Chaucer, all on the same kind of party that is going this way. Chaucer having been captured by the French and is now potentially was going back. She doesn't actually know, but she says, oh, it would be reasonable that he was going back. So, but it's interesting to kind of put that in and also go, oh shit, this is like the time of Chaucer. And I've read Chaucer. I read the Canterbury's Tale in university in the original Old English. And so that's kind of an interesting thing of that. And it's like, oh, okay, this is where you get the split between the French and the English. And you can see if they've been in this war together, maybe we're going to be more open to, because at this point the English are all speaking French, because they're basically, William the Conqueror came over and replaced all the English nobility with French nobility. And that's why also the French nobility the English nobility of this time have all their roots in France. And that's why Edward's made this kind of claim. It's really just fucking a way to be able to try and want to have a just war to pillage France. Tuchman is very much about saying, like, you know, yeah, they want to make it a just war. It's got to be given dispensation by the religious leaders to go murder, you know, fellow Christians and stuff like that. So you have to kind of come up with a justification, just like now. You got to come up with a justification to make it good propaganda and political expediency. The more things change, the more things stay the same. But yeah, so you have those three on boat together, which is kind of cool. All right, I am finished this session because Ja's back and hopefully okay.